Niccola Bombacci was born October 24th, 1879, and he was murdered April 28th, 1945. He was born a commie, but died a fasci. He was 65 years old when he was murdered by Italian communists. But we will get to that later. Throughout this video, I will be pulling quotes from Eric Norling's fine book entitled Revolutionary Fascism. Niccola Bombacci is born into a Catholic family. His father was a former soldier of the Papal States. By his father's design, Niccola starts to go to school to become a member of the Catholic Church. But this was his father's will, and not his, because he quickly drops out of school and joins the anti-clerical local Socialist Party. His clerical schooling background, and by means and manners of his promoting socialist ideology, Niccola would later pick up the nickname the Red Pope. So it's 1903, he joins the PSI, which translates to the Italian Socialist Party. And we go to Norling's book here. His ability to work and his organizational skills got him into the staff of the socialist media outlets, allowing him to increase his influence within the labor movement, then becoming secretary of the party central committee, where he will meet a young Benito Mussolini, who, let us not forget, was the promise of Italian socialism before becoming a national revolutionary. From 1919 to around 1921, Bombacci was actually leader of the PSI. But his run with the PSI would end after that, as Eric Norling explains. Opposing the moderate line of social democracy, Bombacci, along with Gramsci, will found the Communist Party of Italy after the internal breakup of the PSI, and will travel in the early 20s to the USSR to participate in the Bolshevik Revolution, where he had previously been as representative of the Socialist Party and was won over by the Soviet cause. While in Russia, Bombacci befriends Lenin and actually tells him and others, "In Italy, comrades, in Italy, there is but a socialist able enough to lead the people through a revolutionary path, Benito Mussolini." Now, Niccola may have been right about Mussolini leading a revolution. It just was not the revolution Bombacci had expected. But this highlights how a lot of these great people or leader types, their ability is known by the people around them. Bombacci and others seen that Mussolini had the potential to be an avatar for a cause. And we see that common theme among these titans of history. It's either that they know themselves that they are, or they know themselves, they have this feeling that they are destined for greatness, or the people around them believe that these individuals have the potential to be great. Back in Italy, Bombacci continues with their newly formed communist groups called the PCI, aka the Italian Communist Party. As leader, Antonio Gramsci was the theorist, Bombacci the organizer. This kind of it resembles kind of like John Adams and Samuel Adams. John Adams, the intellectual, Sam Adams was the rabble-rouser, the organizer. It seems like it's a parallel kind of thing here. Okay, so as leader of the newly created PCI, he becomes the authentic public enemy number one of the Italian bourgeoisie, who nicknames him the Red Pope. Now, around by this time, Mussolini had left the PSI and was now advancing the cause of fascism. Once friends, Bombacci and Mussolini are now pitted against each other. Back to the book. He, Niccola, will brilliantly revalidate his deputy chair, this time in the lists of the new formation, i.e. the communists, while the fascist squads begin to take the streets facing the communist militias in bloody combat. Bombacci will endeavor to stop the march of fascism to power, but he will fail. From the pages of his newspapers, he launches tirades against fascism and claiming the defense of the communist revolution. It is a time when black shirt squads sing irreverent songs such as, "I don't fear Bombacci, with Bombacci's beard we will make brushes to brighten the bald head of Benito Mussolini." So we already see Bombacci, like Mussolini, he's of leader quality, and this is why he's singled out and had songs made about him by the fascist black shirts. A period comes when communism is in full eternal tensions, and Bombazzi enters into controversy with his fellow party comrades. Being one of the friction points, the choice between nationalism and internationalism. He has shown nationalist tendencies before. And this was one of the reasons that Mussolini also split from the socialist communist ideal. It was and is the age old disagreement between the socialists, national or international. Bombazzi, being a Leninist that he was, which he would remain all his life, saw the Russian Revolution, despite all the Trotsky-ish internationalist rhetoric, remained a largely national revolution, as we have seen since that time too as well. We look at places like China, Cuba, North Korea, all of them adopting quote unquote communism, and all remaining some of the most nationalist countries of the day. Internationalism is, well, we'll dissect that in a bit. Back to revolutionary fascism. Niccola's plight with his own comrades continues. He becomes a fervent defendant of a Italy-USSR approach, most surely speaking in behalf and by instigation of Moscow leaders, but using a national revolutionary language that causes disturbance within the party, who furthermore were already retreating in disarray since the fascist victory. So they're basically telling him, look, you're sounding too much like a fascist here, talking about our nation. It's like, no, there is no nations. It's borderless working people. That's what it's about. And so the fallout happens over that. Bombazzi is progressively marginalized within the PCI and condemned to political ostracism. Although he did not cease contacts with some of the Russian leaders and the Russian embassy where he had worked at. Besides that, one of his sons lived in the USSR. He sincerely believed in the Bolshevik Revolution, and unlike his Italian comrades, the Russians had a national sense of revolution and never will deny his friendship with the USSR. So that was the end of Bombazzi's career as an active communist. But before we continue on with his life, let's go back to that original dispute that caused both Bombazzi and Mussolini and countless other socialists to split from the Marxist-styled communism, and that is the question of nationalism versus internationalism. This is still a dividing factor among socialists. I am a quote-unquote socialist who is a nationalist, and there are plenty of socialists out there who, on the other hand, are internationalists. Now, when my outer self hears internationalist and nationalist, my inner self hears Jewish and Gentile. Let me explain why. First, you have international capitalism, which is largely Jewish dominated, and especially the philosophies of the universal market and the worldwide consuming communities. The ideologues promoting these ideas are heavily Jewish. My video on the great Werner Sombart book, The Jews and Modern Capitalism, details the rise of Jewish power in capitalism for any of you doubters out there. On the other side, you have Marxism and its concept of the borderless working man. Now, unlike it's claimed quite frequently online, Marx was not a part of some solely Jewish conspiracy for internationalism. After all, he did write essays damning the Jews. He wrote essays where he said things like, what is the worldly raison d'etre of Jewry? And raison d'etre means the most important reason. The practical necessity of Jewry is self-interest. What is the worldly religion of the Jews? It is the petty haggling of the hawker. What is his worldly god? It is money. The Jews have emancipated themselves in a Jewish fashion. Not only have they mastered the power of money, but with or without Jews, money has become a world power. The Jews have emancipated themselves by turning Christians into Jews. Now, what he's speaking on, you can find in my video on Otto Weininger and the Spiritual Jew. And this is exactly what he's referring to is the spiritual Jew. The Jews have emancipated themselves by turning the Christians into Jews. Not literally, not converting them to Judaism, but if you watch the video You Gentiles and see the innate natural differences between Jews, this is exactly what they're doing. And this is what modernity is. This is at the foundation of modernity as Jewish intellectualism. And in essence, making Gentiles more Jewish, adopt more Jewish values. And this is the lion's share of modernity. And anyone speaking on modernity that does not address the Jewish influence in the largely overproportionate Jewish hand is will never get to the bottom of the problem, and is not addressing the problem intellectually honestly. They're not, and it's either because they're afraid of being called something, or they haven't taken the time to dig into it for themselves and to see for themselves, and they just quickly dismiss it because that's the in vogue thing to do. But let's continue on. Marx also says, money is the most zealous god of Israel, and no other god can compete with him. Money debases all human gods and turns them into goods. Money is the universal value of everything. Now, despite his awareness of the heavy hand of Jewish influence in capitalism, and once again, we don't even need to look to Gentiles about all these things. You can read You Gentiles, written by a Jew. You can look at Marx's own word, by a Jew, speaking about Jewish capitalism and their influence and their dominance. Everyone knows it and everyone sees it. Anyone that doesn't acknowledge it is a fucking liar, a hypocrite, or a coward. There's no excuse. There's no excuse. You can't be ignorant in this day and age. But, well, you can be ignorant in this day and age, but you shouldn't. You should take the time to dig into it. And I don't mean visiting some shit show, Jew hater site that simplifies and dumbs everything down on the Jewish question, but really digging into it, really reading the great minds of history that have dissected this question. And there you will find more understanding of what's going on. You don't need to get caught in these false narratives of superpowered demon Jews running the world from a little secret office in the middle of some island, that no one knows about. That's idiots like that take the validation out of these important topics that need to be addressed, that people need to be aware of. But we go on. Despite Marx's understanding and speaking on Jewish capitalism, he was like Bobby Fischer. He was ethnically and biologically Jewish, and therefore he was subject to some of the Jewish peculiarities as Jewish philosopher Otto Weininger described. He spoke about these natural differences of Jews, and he goes into, like I said, the video goes into the spiritual Jew on Otto Weininger, and this is essentially what people are being turned into. And Otto Weininger states in his book, Sex and Character, to defeat Judaism, the Jew must first understand himself and war against himself. So far, the Jew has reached no further than to make and enjoy jokes against his own peculiarities. So let's assume Marx did not dig deep enough to understand at the root of his internationalism was the fact that he had generations of his rootless, nationless, nomadic ancestral lineage running through his veins. And for that reason, he could not comprehend the value of a nation. Not only of a nation, but a nation to be among nations. This longing, this feeling, this knowing of nationhood that came so natural to Gentiles, because now, let us not forget, for a long time Gentiles had lived and died, soiled and tilled, loved and fought on the same sacred dirt. There was a bond, a connection there. This was something Jews had to strive to learn. And those that didn't want to become more like their Gentile hosts, naturally, it's evolutionary strategy after all, right? Naturally started the process to make the Gentiles more like them. And thus we have modernity. And once again, this, when you look into it, this is a large factor into what modernity is. And it just simply can't be ignored. Simply can't be ignored. It needs to be addressed. The Jewish capitalist and communist intellectuals, and today you can add comedians, entertainers, activists, etc., all the people on that list largely promote the ideal of internationalism and nationless borders. And on top of all those Jews, add the millions, maybe even billions of spiritual Jews running around today that also believe in this silly shit. Oh man, there's no borders. They're just man-made lines, man. It's ridiculous, and this is why you even see all people that have adopted quote unquote communism become the most nationalists, because internationalism is a facade. It's something promoted by oligarchies because they want to turn us into a bland, consuming set of people with no roots. So we have no roots. The only way we'll identify ourselves by the products we buy, and this will make them super, super, super happy because it just increases their power and puts us more into servitude. Not only servitude to them, but to ourselves, because they feed on our vices. They feed on those low-hanging fruits, and they attack that. And that's all they're turning us into. Degenerate fat fucks addicted to porn and, shit food and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is why you typically see Jews at the spear point of communism and capitalism, and Gentiles at the spear point of fascism and nationalism. It's no coincidence, my friends. It is no coincidence that it goes down like this. And this is exactly where we are today in world politics. Nationalism versus internationalism. But instead of just a divided group of Italian communists, we see a divided world. So the issue is even more toxic today than it was back in Bombacci's time. Now, speaking of him, let's get back to him. Let's get off this rant on internationalism. With the expulsion from the party in 1927, Bombacci enters a stage we can qualify as the years of silence that last until 1936, when he launches his magazine called The Truth, culminating in 1943 in a gradual conversion to fascism. Like, he'll officially become fascist in 43. Now, Bombacci's move towards fascism was not a move to improve himself, because he would join when fascism was falling, and basically all hope had been lost, but he would still join. He, in fact, asked for no titles or anything of that nature. Bombacci was a true Italian socialist. He was not beholden to these labels of right, left, this or that. He was about what was best for his country and his people, which makes his death at the hands of his own people even that much more tragic. He did not approach the Fascist Party, never signed up for the National Fascist Party despite his acknowledged friendship with Mussolini. He did not accept jobs and neither renounced his communist origins. This is all before 43 he's speaking about. His independence was worth more. However, he became convinced that the state proposed by corporate fascism was the most perfect realization socialism put into practice, a state superior to communism. He never concealed his ideals. In 1936, he was writing in the journal The Truth, confessing his adherence to fascism, but also to communism. Fascism did a great social revolution. Lenin and Mussolini, Soviet and fascist corporate state, Rome and Moscow. Much had to be rectified. Nothing we have to apologize. Because today, as yesterday, we are moved by the same ideal, the triumph of labor. After Lenin died, Stalin started to show the world who he really was. Bombacci went from thinking the USSR and Italy could be allies into knowing they have become enemies, and in turn, he had become a fascist. Bombacci writes in November 1937, "The relationship between the USSR and the democratic countries could only have one explanation that would unmask the whole subject. There is just one reason, frivolous, vulgar, but real. Interest, money, business. Due to that, this former communist could openly declare that we proclaim with a clear conscience that Stalin's Bolshevik Russia has become a colony of international Hebrew Masonic capitalism." The anti-Semitic allusion is not new to Bombacci, nor the socialist theoreticians. From the beginning of the century, as we should not forget that modern anti-Semitism had its most fervorous upholders precisely among the revolutionary doctrines of the late 19th century, where the Jew incarnated the figure of the hated capitalist, and rightfully so. In Bombacci, one does not find a racialist anti-Semitism, but a social one, according to the Mediterranean theories of the Jewish problem, differing from the German or French anti-Semitism. So in other words, niccola didn't invoke Jewish identity simply because they were different ethnically or racially, but they were different socially, economically, and politically. And that was pretty common among Italian anti-Semitism. It was based around that more than anything else. Now, Italy did later adapt Germany's race laws in regards to Jews, but that was only at Hitler's will over Mussolini, which I think was a great mistake for Italy. I mean, when we look at the Axis powers, they were all a mistake for each other. They made horrible allies. None of them worked in unison. It was a clusterfuck from beginning to end, and it's strange how it worked out that way because they made horrible allies. Japan, Italy, Germany did basically. Germany tried to help Italy, but Italy and Japan hurt Germany so much. It's just I guess it's a topic for another time. It's crazy how all that went down. They were horrible allies. But we continue on. In 1943, shortly before the fall of fascism concluded, Bombacci summarizing his position on a flyer. And we go to that flyer. Which one of the two revolutions, the fascist or the Bolshevik, will leave its mark in the 20th century, going down in history as the creator of a new order of social values at a planetary scale? Which one of the two revolutions has solved the agrarian problem, truly interpreting the peasants' desires and aspirations and the economic and social interest of the national community? Rome has won. Materialist, semi-barbaric Moscow with a totalitarian employer-state capitalism leading its citizens to the utmost misery, the extent industrialization in countries that during the 19th century endured a bourgeoisie capitalist regime process, Moscow completes the capitalist phase. Rome is a different thing. Now, I think what he's getting at here is what is called super capitalism, and that was what the belief of a lot of these communist states would become, that you'd still have these oligarchies like we have today underneath this capital liberal democratic system, but they would be even more totalitarian in these communist states because the oligarchies would dictate through the state and all business would be run through them and all profit through them, and you even have more of a slave wage than you have today because you have the equalization of the masses, which makes the perfect working people. So I think this is what he's getting at, is this ideal of super capitalism, which I think we see in play today as well, going that way. These useful idiots thinking they're protesting a system while they're actually a part of the system. We go on. The Italian monarchy had betrayed Mussolini. They sent him to prison and squashed fascism in Italy. In turn, Hitler would send a group of paratroopers who hang glided in to break Mussolini out of prison. One of the liberating German paratroopers greeted Mussolini with, "Duce, the Fuhrer has sent me to set you free." To which Mussolini replied, "I knew that my friend would not forsake me." Mussolini, free, again tried to raise fascism in Italy. And this is when Niccola becomes a full-time fascist, as he writes to Mussolini, "Today, more than ever, I am totally on your side. The king's vile betrayal has utterly brought ruin and dishonor upon Italy, but it has liberated thee from the Pluto-monarchic compromises of 1922. People seem to forget that, unlike Hitler in Germany, Mussolini did not have full control of Italy. The king remained atop the food chain in Italy. And what the king did was essentially made Mussolini a glorified prime minister in order to subdue the fascist revolution. And kind of like what they tried with Hitler in Germany. They gave him the position, but fate being on Hitler's side at that moment, the president had died, Hitler took power. And so it worked out to his advantage. For Mussolini, it didn't. Now, why he didn't just take care of the king and make it a full fascist revolution, I don't know. I wasn't alive then. I don't know the inner politics. I don't know if that would have led to a bloody revolution that it was pointless going. Maybe they were working a long-term plan to make Italy become a truly fascist state. Whatever it was, he basically made the mistake. He idolized Julius Caesar, but he kind of made the same mistake. He showed too much mercy to his enemies, and they killed him because of that. So let us learn from history. And Bombacci was pretty much saying, hey, look on the bright side. Now, because the king has betrayed us, like we have the high ground now, we have the moral position, we can just knock him off and really assume power and do it right this time. He concludes in his letter to Mussolini, always at your service with, by now, 30 years of high esteem. Bombacci goes throughout northern Italy doing what he did best, speaking to the working people, get them fired up and in support of the fascist revolution. But as we know now, Mussolini's attempt to regain power was stifled by the Italian resistance and international resistance. Loyal to the end, he will remain with Mussolini even when all is already lost. Prophetically, he speaks of this to his workers in one of his last public appearances, March 14th, 1945. Brethren, in faith and struggle, I have not reneged my ideals for which I have struggled, and for which, if it is God's will to grant me the possibility to live a while longer, I will always fight for. Niccola Bombacci, always faithful, always serene, will accompany Mussolini in his last and dramatic journey to his death. The testimony of Benito's son, Vittorio Mussolini, details the last time he saw his father and Niccola Bombacci. I thought about this man's fate, a true proletarian's apostle, once a bitter enemy of fascism and now standing beside my father, without any position or stipend, faithful to two different leaders, Lenin and Mussolini. To the death, his calmness comforted me. As for Niccola Bombacci's last moments on earth, shortly Mussolini had parted ways with his faithful column to spare them of having to share his destiny. Bombacci is arrested by a band of communist partisans along with a group of fascist hierarchs. So they get Bombacci and some other fascist hierarchs. In the morning of April 28th, he faced the firing squad. By his side was Baraccu, a valorous veteran, mutilated by war. Pavloni, the party secretary/poet. Zembrino, an intellectual, and Coppola, another thinker. All cried out before the firing squad that assassinated them, "Long live Italy!" Whereas, a paradox in itself, and a faithful reflex of Niccola Bombacci's controversial personality, he, as his body fell riddled by bullets of the communists, would cry, "Long live socialism!" And there you go, killed by his own. These useful idiots, these fucking dummies. Where is your socialist paradise now, Italy? Where is it at now? The commies served as useful idiots for international capitalism, and we see Italy is in the same state that every other country in the West is because of these useful fucking idiots killing a man that loved them and loved the idea of socialism and loved his country, loved his people, loved his fellow citizens. But these useful idiots murdered him. Murdered him. His last words. Long live socialism. A true fighter for the cause. Killed by his own. Because they were useful idiots. And we see that today. We see the people who hate and attack fascism, a system that would benefit them the most, being useful idiots to international capitalism. That's why it is a us and them. We see today, I see just recently there was some, and we see this with a lot of conservative talk hosts. Especially the female ones, they'll get into it with the liberals and be like, "Oh, we can have different opinions and be friends." There's just example, some little 24-year-old girl that all the grown-up men get their politics from. As disgusting and laughable that is, grown men getting their politics and getting hyped up over a 24-year-old Barbie. But she goes on to The Daily Show, which is a heavily leftist show that mocks, insults, and attacks everyone like you and me. And they get their kicks off of making fun of us and calling us evil people, dehumanizing us. So it's going to make it easy for them to commit violence against us. If you don't see that's what they're doing, that's what they're fucking doing when they label us these things that have these negative stigmas to it. But anyway, so these people make their living off of dehumanizing and mocking us, and apparently her and her side too, and these conservatives. And they go on there and they have their little heated debate that gets a lot of social media attraction from both sides, and they either love or hate this little girl now. But then that night, she's having drinks with this motherfucker. And then she's asked about it, saying, "Oh, we can have different opinions and be friends."
It was two people having a great conversation.
Did he enjoy
it?
Was it a good conversation, though?
It's an absolutely great conversation.
Okay.
You can be friends with people you disagree with. It's okay.
Interesting.
No, 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 no. Not when they're trying to kill our way of life. Not when they're trying to destroy our children's future. Not when they're destroying our country. You cannot be fucking friends because you'll end up like niccola bombacci, shot to death by your own brethren because they were served as useful idiots for international capitalism. Fuck that. Fuck that. There is no friends. It's us versus them. And that's what this awakening is coming from. That's why we invoke the name of people like niccola bombacci, because we cannot forget. We cannot forget these honorable people that sacrificed and died. And we cannot lax on our morals and show weakness when we've seen what happened to so many great men throughout history. It's a betrayal to their memory and their sacrifice. Where is your socialist paradise now, Italy? Where is it, you useful idiot communist that killed your own brethren in the service of international finance? That's who you fought for. Let that sink in. That's what you fought for, and that's what the world is engulfed in now. Because useful idiots went around, teamed up with the international finance and destroyed every hope of nationalism and socialism throughout the world. And they think they're heroes for it. And now these same useful idiots are sitting here crying about political ideologies they have no idea about. And these same useful idiots will kill you or me as quick as day because they have already dehumanized us. So let us not forget. Let us not forget people like niccola bombacci. And unfortunately, all too few in English exist about him. So you can pick up Eric Norling's fine book, Revolutionary Fascism, which mainly deals with Mussolini's second attempt to raise fascism, but is one of the few things that details niccola bombacci's life in English. Great person who loved his country, who loved his people, who loved the ideal of a unified people, and was unfortunately murdered by the people he loved most, his own